Hello and welcome to Newsroom's latest episode of Raw Politics. This is a weekly visual and audio political chat with myself, Newsroom's political editor Joe Moyer, Newsroom's co-editor Tim Murphy. Hi Tim.
Hey.
And Newsroom's national affairs editor Sam Suchdeva. Welcome Sam.
Kia ora.
This week, we're going to be discussing Meka Whaitiri's shock waka jump from Labour to Te Pāti Māori, and is the King's coronation a good time for New Zealand to start talking about becoming a republic? To wrap things up, we'll offer a recommendation of something that we've enjoyed this week that we think that you might like too. On Tuesday night, Te Māori broke a big story here in Parliament. Meka Whaitiri, not only a Labour MP for Ikarawhiti, but also a minister outside of Cabinet, has been in Parliament since winning the 2013 by-election in that seat. She has decided that her time with the Labour Party is over. A lot of blindsided Labour MPs who had absolutely no idea that Meka Whaitiri had actually approached Te Pāti Māori herself, had decided that she was done. She ghosted them all, didn't communicate with any of them, didn't send any text messages back, didn't answer any phone calls. Didn't even bother to answer the phone call that Prime Minister Chris Hipkins put into her when he landed in London to the news. I would like to see a photo, if someone took one, of him looking at his phone and learning this information on arrival in London for, of course, the King's coronation. So, interesting times. Could mean a lot of things for the election. Of course, we're nearly 5 months out at this point. The other part of all of this, of course, is what it means for Meka Whaitiri in Parliament. And the thing that has intrigued me, Sam, which I'd love you to explain a little bit about, is how we had this situation for about 2 hours yesterday where it was completely unclear which party, in terms of the Electoral Act, in terms of standing orders, whatever you want to call it, because there seems to be a few things at play here, which party Meka Whaitiri was actually tied to for about 2 hours yesterday, and then, of course, it all kind of unravelled in the House. So talk us through that. What happened with that?
Yeah, look, the constitutional law experts are absolutely fizzing on Twitter. You should see them. This is their sort of mecca, I think, their heyday. So it's a very... I didn't even intend to do that. That's terrible. Yeah, so this all comes down to the waka jumping legislation that was reintroduced in the last term of Parliament. It was New Zealand First's baby, and part of the coalition agreement. So the idea is that you've kind of got two ways that can be triggered. One is that if the party leader writes a formal letter to the Speaker saying this MP has changed parties, they're distorting the proportionality of Parliament, they have to go, and that needs a 2/3 majority, I think, of the caucus to go in favour. And the other one is it's a slightly lower bar. An MP says, hey, I am leaving, I'm joining another party, I'm not with my current party anymore, and then it's meant to be automatically triggered. So we ended up in this sort of weird debate over what exactly did Meka Whaitiri send the Speaker? Did it constitute formal notice for the terms of the legislation, and did that mean she was going? And so we've ended up in a perverse situation where I think David Seymour probably had the best line on this yesterday, where she's Schrodinger's MP. She's sort of both a Labour MP and not a Labour MP. So it's somewhat tortured. So yeah, she's being treated as if she is an independent in terms of the parliamentary process, access to questions and so on. But in a sense, she's kind of still part of the Labour Parliamentary Party, or she hasn't gone to Te Pāti Māori. So it's really raised some issues with the sort of the holes in this legislation or the interpretation of it. And it kind of goes back to the fact, and I don't know, Tim, you probably remember Winston harping on about this, but you know, that this is something that no one really wanted. It was a dead rat that the last government had to swallow. And then you see it's not being used. So I kind of feel like there's a good case to just get it off the books now, because no one wanted this in the first place.
It's one of those things, isn't it, that's just a bequest again from New Zealand First that they ought to put right. They've had a big majority, they could have done it. No one wants this thing to, certainly not to apply to electorate seats, right? Like this. And so we've got this weird standoff where the Speaker can make the call and sit tight, and we're left as we are. My issue, you guys might be able to help me on this, is either way, it doesn't make any real difference, does it? Because if she is deemed to have vacated the seat, there could either be a by-election or there's the October election. And in both cases, it could be expected she'd return. Would that be a fair call this early?
Yeah, I mean, this is the point, right, and this is the interesting thing too with the Māori electorates, is whether people voting in those seats are voting for a particular person or whether they're voting for a party. Now, there's an argument to be made with Ikaroa Rāwhiti that Meka herself has that massive support and that she would win a by-election if that situation occurred, and or she would win at the general election. Now, the Labour Party pushes back on that, of course, and says, well, they're going to find a candidate. And you had Willie Jackson saying, I've already had 2 star candidates come to me in the last 24 hours and all of that. That's all good and well. And to be fair to Willie Jackson, he does also have a point that that seat is very Labour. It has never been held by anyone but Labour. But I think you also just have to take into consideration the fact that Meka Whaitiri has been there for as long as she has. And also just, I guess, the way that politics is at the moment too. And you are seeing some momentum behind Te Pāti Māori. They obviously have come into Parliament with Rawiri Waititi winning the seat of Labour. Debbie Ngāti Wapaka is looking pretty good at the moment in Te Taihaoru. I think that if she was running against Adrian Rurafe from Labour, she wouldn't probably win that seat. He has such massive support in terms of the Ratana movement. Soraya Peki Mason will be hoping that transfers to her, but that's yet to be seen. But yeah, so there's a lot of movement going on in these seats, and I think that Te Pāti Māori is increasingly getting a lot more momentum behind it, and I think that ultimately Meka Whaitiri will probably end up bringing over a combination of Labour voters who just believe that she's the right person for that job, but also Labour voters who perhaps have looked at the way that Chris Hipkins is moving the party in the direction of it and say, well, actually, maybe Te Pāti Māori's for us. And then you've got to throw in that third factor of them being potentially a bloc come the election anyway, and needing Labour, the Greens and Te Pāti Māori in order to form a government. So there's just so many factors in there to take into consideration.
So it's not much of a way for a would-be coalition partner in Te Pāti Māori to be treating its senior likely betrothed after October, is it? Doesn't get you far with your senior partner, does it? To treat them not so much leaving, but then to do all the non-communication and kind of the mana disenhancing stuff with the Prime
I think
Minister.
that's fair. There's not a huge amount of respect that seems to have been shown here, but I thought actually the way Labour responded initially was to be very diplomatic. You had both Carmela Sepuloni, the acting Prime Minister, and Kelvin Davis, the senior Māori minister, saying, look, it's up to her. She's made this decision. We're disappointed, but that's sort of it. The tone does seem to have changed. You had the following day, Kelvin Davis going into the media and talking about how she was sort of a small fry compared to Jacinda Ardern leaving, and she hasn't handled that well. So maybe they've kind of taken stock and seen that actually there is an argument to be made that they go harder here. But the interesting thing is when you talk about coalitions, and there was a good question about this from someone on my favourite website of all time, Twitter. I am hopelessly addicted. But they said, there's a lot of, when we talk about the latest polls and sort of who's up and who's down, there's a lot of discussion around Te Pāti Māori as a potential kingmaker. And is it actually fair to frame them as such when they have basically indicated they will not go with the National Party? Christopher Luxon has said he will not go with Te Pāti Māori. We've now got a former Labour MP who has defected, another former Labour MP, Lewis Awul, rumoured to be running. Should we be taking them out of the equation in terms of, who might hold the balance of power? Do they just need to be sort of counted with Labour and the Greens on the left?
Joe, one of the things that struck me was the surprise that Meka might do this. And I went back and had a look, as we all do, at her maiden statement to the House in 2013. And she was crystal clear then, saying that she was proud to be there for Labour. But she made the point, iwi Māori have not forgotten the challenges to this relationship. I state this as a friendly reminder. This historic relationship should never be taken for granted. And so on her first day speaking, she made it clear that, Labour had to be pursuing the path that she felt they needed to for Māori.
Yeah, and I think if you strip away kind of all of the chaos of the last couple of days and how it's all played out, And, and I think it's interesting too how emotional Carmel Sepuloni, for example, was fronting the press conference. This genuinely seemed to be quite out of the blue. And from what I can gather from those I've spoken to in the Māori caucus, there had not been issues raised by Meka Whaitiri in terms of what she felt Labour wasn't delivering on. I think you can look at the co-governance issue, which a lot of people are, and say, well, they halted the UNDRIP, United Nations work and He Puapua and that sort of stuff. That doesn't matter, because a lot of the stuff that came out of He Puapua has actually been happening anyway, just because the government of the day thinks it's good policy. And if you look at Three Waters, which has been one of the more controversial ones, the co-governance structure remains. It was completely unchanged. So it would be interesting to know what Meka's reasons are, because I think if you go back to those comments that you've just made there, Tim, she doesn't seem to have indicated at any point as a Labour MP or minister that Labour hasn't been doing what they should be. There hasn't been sort of some explosive interview from her or a speech in the House or something to suggest that they're on completely the wrong path. So, it just comes back to what is her reason for leaving, and maybe it is just as simple as Te Pāti Māori felt like the right place for her to be, and it was actually a heart-over-head decision. And that might seem, difficult for some people to understand, but, maybe that is all it is. Is it time for New Zealand to become a republic? I feel like this question has been asked so many times, and here we are talking about it again. But, of course, Chris Hipkins is currently in London, about to attend the King's coronation. Gosh, I better get this right. King Charles III?
That's correct.
Yep. Very exciting times for those of us who care. I am not one of them. So we had the Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, before he headed off on this trip, talking about the fact that he himself thinks that New Zealand should become a republic. That seemed a little bit deja vu because, of course, former Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern thought the same thing. Doesn't seem that anything's probably going to change anytime soon, though. Why not, Sam? Why is there not a referendum tomorrow?
Because people are lazy. Our prime ministers have been lazy, and you can quote me on that. in relation to the Republican debate. I mean, it is just inertia that wins out, right? You kind of go, yes, look, the status quo isn't great. We've got this weird family who are doing all sorts of dramatic things on the other side of the pond, and Prince Harry on his tell-alls and writing about his todger, and it's just very strange. But the cost of having to find a new head of state and deal with the flag. Remember, we had a flag referendum and that went horrifically. So that'll be fun doing that again. It's sort of like, yes, symbolically it's important, and I would probably support a move to a republic. But it is easy to say, look, this doesn't need to be a priority for us, which is what Chris Hipkins has said. And you look at the polling, and actually there is still a plurality, I think, not an outright majority, but I think high 40% who are in favour of the status quo, staying as a monarchy. That does break down differently by generation. So younger New Zealanders are more supportive. So, I think it's a combination of costs, effort, a lack of public support, but that may well change in the coming years as people from the younger generation find themselves in the spotlight.
What do you think it will take, Tim? Because, this question was asked of Chris Hipkins this week. Is it a case of once 1 in every 3 people he meets out on the street starts saying, I'd really like to be a republic? Is that when we take this seriously? At what point are we actually going to make a decision, or are we going to be continuously tortured for another however many decades by having this conversation?
Well, first I'm going to make a prediction and rule it out, not in my prime ministership, but in my lifetime. So I hope for a couple of decades or a few more than that left, but it's not going to.
I reckon there's a chance you could be Prime Minister yet, Tim. Don't rule it out.
Well, or our head of state, New Zealand's first president, Tim Murphy.
If you get moving with your petitions and your referenda, Sam, look, isn't it tedious? And poor old Chris Hipkins, he's going off for his sausage rolls and his cup of tea at Buckhouse in a few days and gets asked the question, he is a Republican, but how on earth do you answer that without seeming discourteous and impolite and inopportune in terms of the timing? Look, I'd see no more weight on this, Joe, from this end for decades or generations. And I think what would have to cause it will be something international, probably at their end, that's something either tragic, and we lose a few of them and get down to someone who no one wants in any part of the world as the monarch, or something scandalous that has the same effect, that turns off the populace in Australia or here or elsewhere. Somewhere in the Caribbean, I see, just did make that move, and Charles went there as Prince of Wales and nodded and received it, maturely and fine. So I don't think there's a great sort of impediment to it ever being so. But New Zealanders are apathetic. It'll have to be something that turns us off. It won't be by someone trying to get a campaign going and turn us on to a republic.
It's interesting that you mentioned the scandal bar, because I think some people would argue that the scandal bar is hit high, very high, flashing in fact, on many occasions. But
well, we've passed it. We've leapt that bar and we don't care, so we won't care.
Do you think that it might also be a matter of what Australia does? We have a strange relationship. We love to follow them. They've had a shot at becoming a republic in the past and didn't get there, but there is certainly stronger Republican sentiment across the ditch. So is it a case that we might be a bit reticent, but then our big brother does and we go, oh, actually, should we follow them? Do you think we would take a lead from Australia in that sense, or are we a bit different?
No, probably. I mean, it's been our way, hasn't it? Wait till someone else does something and then look at it. But they haven't changed their flag yet. They've still got a Union Jack as well. And short of President Rupert Murdoch, who are they going to put up either?
Well, at least if we become a republic, we can talk even more about our independent foreign policy, which would excite you.
Yeah, I would love that. That would be great. Who? I mean, just kind of finally, or be interested in your thoughts. Who would be? We can have joke answers and serious answers. Who would be an option if we were to do it in the next 5 to 10 years? I.e., so we would have a reasonable chance of guessing this. Who would our first head of state be? Independent head of state as a republic. What are the options?
I have one that I think would be a joke, but I think people would be serious, because I actually take a little bit of issue with the fact that we've sent Richie McCaw over as one of our people to this coronation. There was, a handful of people that have gone with the Prime Minister. And I'd just like, as a country, for us to move past just taking people who are famous for, holding a ball at some point. So it would be ridiculous if Richie McCaw became it, but I bet you if we had this conversation, there'd be a whole lot of people who would suggest it.
Oh, absolutely. And that horrifies me. I'm a Cantabrian, so I should be behind it, but I want nothing to do with that. It's fine. He's very great at rugby. He was great at rugby. He's one of our 20 greatest living New Zealanders, according to his role in the Order of Merit. I can't remember. The New Zealand Order of New Zealand. Yes, horrific. Tim, what do you reckon? Who would you pick?
Well, I was going to suggest someone from a oval ball background, but not Richie. But I won't, Joe, because I think that may offend you. How about the top twins? You could have two of them at once, cover all bases. Look, that's the thing. Really, at the moment, with the Order of New Zealand, you go through that list and there's 20 there, or however many that are living. The most obvious will be Jim Bolger, Republican in his own right, ex-Prime Minister, ambassador and so on. But, there are a lot of people saying his age and obviously his clear political background. So, it becomes hard. I don't favour anyone in particular. I think they should look to the fourth estate of the Constitution and perhaps dip into the life members of the press gallery. There must be someone good in there.
Barry Soper has more time on his hands now, I think.
Barry, let's go for Barry.
Aside from childcare.
Well, my vote's with you, Tim. Just saying. Our newsroom audience question today is, does ACT have any real chance of beating National's Simon O'Connor in Tamaki? As our resident Auckland resident? Tim, what do you think?
Well, I'm a voter in Tāmaki, and the only answer is no. But to explain that further, this time Simon O'Connor, after winning well, even with Judith Collins as leader in a devastating election in 2020, and they always win well, and right back to Muldoon, there's been a series of men who have been conservative and have won well. But in this term, on the local area Facebook pages that I read, there are increasing noises and opposition personally to him on his various moral stances. So it could be that ACT can get a little bit of attention on that basis, and I think that was what they said when they launched their get some attention, no chance in the electorate vote, but maybe just boost a few thousand party votes from profile and the argument, really. But no, there should be no way that National could ever lose one of its safest seats.
I'm interested, Sam, because you have interviewed Simon O'Connor a reasonable amount. He's quite active in the China space. Is what you kind of see and hear with the very out there comments, is all of that stuff him, or is it almost as if there's like two personalities going on here?
I think you can reconcile the two. This is the thing, there's never been any secret about it. It's kind of priced in for many of the voters of Tāmaki, I would assume. He's always been like this. He's got these kind of either endearing or weird, depending on how you look at it, videos, Facebook Lives that he'll shoot like walking through the domain and whatever part of Tāmaki he's in, where he talks about the issues of the day. So he's been hitting the headlines more often, and I guess it's become more uncomfortable for his party leaders. But this is who he is, and I'd put him in a similar camp to Lewis Wall, and tellingly they were both co-chairs of the New Zealand co-chairs of the Interparliamentary Alliance on China. They are conviction politicians, for better or worse. They'll say what they think, and it will land them in trouble with their leaders. It will sometimes land them in trouble with the public, and it doesn't really do them favours in terms of taking on any senior positions. And there's a reason probably why he's never been a minister or held a senior portfolio, really, but that's just who he is. So no, I don't see the contradiction there. It's just that he kind of marries up areas where maybe there is some logic to what he's saying to ones where he's a little bit sort of almost off the spectrum in a sense.
I think one of the most interesting things about Simon O'Connor is that he's Simon Bridges' brother-in-law.
And he almost became a priest, right?
Yeah, actually, that's probably the most interesting thing. Let's be honest, we'll reorder those.
It's nice to have some colourful characters in Parliament,
Let's wrap things up with some recommendations. Something you have listened to, read, watched this week that you think others should. Sam, let's start with you.
Yes, I would like to give a shout out to our esteemed Christchurch colleague, David Williams, who's done a fantastic piece on the cuts that the Department of Conservation is looking at making to a number of their tracks and their assets. They've had a big issue with sort of neglecting some of their dock huts and the walkways, and with the sort of the fees or the money that they're going to have to pay to restore that, they're going to have to make some really tough decisions. And I think he shone light on that really well. It was a fascinating piece.
Tim, what about you?
Well, mine's to mark the solemn and joyous coronation of our King and beloved Majesty, is a story in the times.co.uk, which is basically a long piece about the man who they call the party planner and funeral director to the royals. This is the guy who gets the responsibility as part of his title of organising funerals, coronations, state openings and so on. Really interesting, really cool kind of insight into the scale and responsibility he has.
Mine's a recommendation, but also just a bit of praise, really, because I think that the massive scoop this week from Wina Harawira from Te Māori was brilliant. She broke the story about Meka Whaitiri waka jumping from Labour to Te Pāti Māori. And that, to me, is just having good contacts and being in the loop, and was a really, really good yarn. So check that out if you haven't already. That's it from Raw Politics for this week. Thank you to our producers, Hugo Stewart and Mark Jennings, our readers, listeners and watchers. Please send any burning questions you have to me at joe.moyer@newsroom.co.nz. Thank you, Sam and Tim, for your contributions today.
Thank you, and God save the King.
Good night.
You can find us next week, same time, same place, here on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.